Hey, are you a business owner, entrepreneur, or professional? If so, we want you to apply to be a featured guest on our show. My name is Adam Torres, and I host the Mission Matters series of podcasts. I've recorded over 3,000 episodes, and we are just getting started. How do you know if you'd be a good guest to be on the show? Well, only one way to find out, and that's to apply, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We want guests that have a story to tell, guests with a brand, a product, or a service that can benefit my audience of listeners. If this sounds like you, go to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. I'd love to talk to you and get to know more about your story. Again, head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, now let's get into the show. Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Dr. Kevin Fleming on the line, and he's founder and CEO over at Gray Matters International. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, Dr. Fleming. So we got a lot to talk about. I'm excited to get into it. So we'll talk about some of my favorite topics. We'll talk about your practice, of course, and how you're helping executives excel and succeed. But just to get us kicked off, I'll start off like I start off all the shows. So Dr. Fleming, we at Mission Matters, we amplify stories for business owners, entrepreneurs, and executives. So that's our mission here. Dr. Fleming, what mission matters to you?
Yeah, this population that you speak to, that I speak to, the synergy that we have, these executives, owners, entrepreneurs, my mission is really around finding that ache, that hurt, that burnout, that piece inside them that I guess some people have called the imposter syndrome, or that piece in them where they're succeeding, but there's something missing. That something missing kind of moved into a tagline for my company that I used for many years. And it says, when success doesn't mean happiness. That's kind of the niche area. And that's really where my heart is. And the mission is for Gray Matters. It's really around finding that disconnect and doing something about it for these guys and gals, because this is really a forgotten population. They're driven, they're successful, they attain a lot, they seem to have a lot of what the world offers. They grab it, they get it, they use it, they produce, they do a lot of contributions to our world and for our society. And yet, if you were to be a fly on the wall on a Gray Matters day and to be inside some of these sessions with the folks I work with, your heart would break, because there is something not right. And it may not be something terribly tragic or wrong or psychopathological or anything crazy like that. But there is something that a lot of researchers have called the hedonic treadmill. And this seems to be this behavioral economics-based term that explains why, if you pursue one economic path of success and achievement and some kind of worldly based noting yourself and things, if you keep doing that, even if it has some side effect of goodness for the world in a contributory way, the brain can't seem to switch gears really easy. And so we become, a man with a hammer, the world's a nail. It becomes that way. And we can't seem to get out of ourselves, our own shadow, our own way of doing things. And those are the type stories where I really enjoy helping people find this paradox and unlocking it, and trying to understand that success and happiness are actually two different things when it comes to the brain. And it can be very difficult to merge them in a very beautiful way where you can have both. And that's really what gets me up every day and makes me really do some good work with these guys and gals.
Man, that's amazing. And I do want to go specifically into the work that you're doing for these executives. But I mean, just kick it off. Like, how'd you get started on this path? Like, did you always know you wanted to do this? Did you fall into it? Like, how'd Dr. Fleming get here?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was a shrink for many years, listening to stories and hearing pain and all those kinds of typical one-on-one conversations of counseling, so to speak. And it occurred to me one day, because sometimes those people that, again, you and I share our passions with and helping in terms of the executive population, they sometimes dribble in by mistake, so to speak, into these, I shouldn't say by mistake, some of them intentionally choose it, but into these therapy sessions. And what I realized was there was a different brain working inside these people. Well, and the typical sort of what I call to describe the water while you drowned and call that success type dialogue doesn't really work with these folks, because they'll sit there and go, hey, doc, this is great, but are you going to actually change something here? Because I'm coming back every week and I'm processing the same stuff and I still got this problem. So, and so it hit me that I really loved having that fire under my butt a bit and having people say, hey, there's got to be a higher bar here. And what I found, though, when I dived into sort of different paths to take out of clinical and the clinical neuroscience world, was I realized that we really had two choices. We had therapists and we had coaches. We had counseling dialogues going on, and we had a bunch of positive, happy, vibrant, motivational at all costs type folks that were going to get people through it, and they both have their time and place in this world, no doubt about it. But I didn't find that there was an intersection point that between these two fields. I really felt, boy, do we need something there where someone can have the clinical acumen to say, that's a disorder. There's something going on here that's not normal. And yet at the same time, talk in a way that's coaching based, that's very behavioral based, that uses innovation and change, not just a bunch of words dripping out of your mouth every hour, but that you can get fast, radical change for these high expectation people, but not at a cost of calling reality. And just because you want to motivate somebody to do something, well, I think, paper that covers rock is reality, and you can't do motivation and disregard reality. And some of these people have damage; they have burnout based effects. So all this to say, I realized there was a real niche to merge these two worlds together, and that's where Gray Matters was born.
And that's awesome. I love it. And I like how you said, sometimes they just kind of end up in these sessions. So let's go further into gray matter as a whole. So I have an idea, like you're definitely helping executives, high performing individuals, work through what their, let's say, work through their success. I mean, you'll give us more insight on that, of course. But tell us a little bit more about just the company overall.
Yeah, so it really goes after. There's actually two arms of the company. The common denominator between both arms is really an application of some real cutting edge, what we call decisional neuroscience. And so what we'll do is we'll bring in to the room or to these arrangements real cutting edge neurotechnology, neuroeconomic insights, assessment tools, things that can get at irrationality, right? Because when the rational parts are working in us, that's great. We can use motivation, get out of bed and change X, Y, Z. But when it's not, it really befuddles these type of people, because they're used to having A equals B, B equals C, so A equals C. It's like they get it all logically tight and things work. What happens when all your effort and will and intellect doesn't produce the outcome you desire? Well, that creates an internal hell for these folks. And so, as Einstein said, no problem's ever solved on the same level of thinking that the problem got created on. That's really what Gray Matters is about, is applying those second order change type solutions and methods that you're not going to find in a psychiatric office or in a counseling office or in a business coach office. So we're kind of real innovators in that. So back to the two arms. So we use those neuroscience lenses and methodologies in two ways. There's a corporate arm that really goes into organizations. And a company or HR person, an organizational development person may contact me and say, hey, listen, we're working inside a culture transformation project, or we have a team that's really dysfunctional, or we're stuck over here. And we've done every coach and trainer you can imagine, every PowerPoint on the planet, and hasn't, done anything. What do you got? Could you figure out, on the 18th layer of this onion, what the hell is going on here? And that's kind of when we go in and look at from a systems perspective, where some of these behavior change quagmires are on a more systemic level, assess it and get some proper second order change solutions into those realms that are not just run of the mill. Hey, you got a team conflict issue. Well, here's some brainstorming session as an offsite. It's done all the time. I don't think it works all the time. And there's a lot of reasons why. So there's that arm of the company where we're going to apply decisional neuroscience into some functional corporate problems that have some real bottom line issues. Then there's the private mental health component, right? The concierge service piece, where these executives or their marriage or their family will, retain me to help them get unstuck. And those kind of things can be wide and varied. They can be addiction. They can be a marriage issue. They can be one of their kids not performing. Also could be an addiction as well in their system there.
Yeah.
Or it can be a bunch of, mood disorder stuff. Stress burnout is huge. We're seeing that grow exponentially in our world because of the boundaryless way these guys and gals have to live. Nonstop communication, and the brain just continually processes too much information, retains very little. And then when you try to execute, you have a disconnect. And we end up trying to get in there and solve where that disconnect is and how to make it all sync better.
Man, Doc, I as you're talking, I feel like, number one, thank you for all the information. I feel like I'm in a session right now. I feel like most of the time you talk to people and they're in the executive role. And like, as we become, our little companies becoming bigger, I'm sitting here thinking like, whoa, how are you speaking my language? I thought I was preparing for this interview. You read my bio? What's going on here? This is great. These are all great tools. And I know, by the way, I'm saying that picking on myself, but I know some of my audience are thinking the exact same thing right now. Like, is he talking directly to me? Like, is this two-way right now in terms of this camera? So Doc, I want to go a little bit further into get a little bit micro into the process, and maybe just talk about some of the actual tools you use, because as you mentioned, like some of the executives listening are like, yeah, that sounds great, but maybe I've heard it or some other things. Yes. So like, let's put some meat around that so they understand the real difference.
Yeah, especially in the world of neuroscience, right? I mean, you can Google anything right now, put neuroplasticity in your search engine or change your brain. There's a great phrase. And you'll get everything under the sun. And Google's not, necessarily your best truth indicator, for what is really good neuroscience, what's pseudo neuroscience. It's a really good question. And that's actually a pride piece for us in my company, is just, I really want to introduce the best of best. And so there's a lot of kicking at tires. I mean, I was a neuropsychologist for years, worked on a lot of cognitive and brain-based rehabilitation problems for people, professional athletes, a lot of TBI stuff. And so I had the chance to kind of get in the lab, so to speak, and see what works, see what doesn't. It's given me a real good perspective by the time Gray Matters was formed to kind of throw away a bunch of pseudo neuroscience tools. And that's what I think a lot of us, sadly, are saddled with and when they try to search for these sort of self-help, brain-changing kind of programs, right? Or wearables, you'll hear that phrase a lot, is they're not really good, in my opinions, for the deep type conflicts and trauma. That's a big word that we'll use a lot in Gray Matters. Trauma-based issues that are inside us. What a typical common pop culture wearable or online program of neuroplasticity is good for is typically maybe some ADHD type effects of boosting up your performance on a video game, maybe, but not real lasting central nervous system transformations on the fight, flight, freeze circuitry. That's really, when you look at the meat and potatoes of what our initial kickoff with most of our executive is, we have to get the sense of threat down. And believe it or not, most of corporate America is operating inside it. They're operating inside a fight, flight, freeze state while masking it, because what they'll do is they'll perform very well on a transactional level, make people think that they're fine. And as you know, with this brain type issues that we all have in our world, in our life, it's not like a broken arm. We have a cast to show that you have something wrong, or you're not bleeding out of your arm. These things we hide very well. And the brain is a self-deceptive organ. It wants to, excuse my French, kind of keep your bullshit away. So a lot of the methodologies we use are initially on the central nervous system. The first thing we got to do is get the sense of self-regulation in check, because the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex right up here is your CEO of your brain. And that's going to be impaired if you're getting your limbic area running the show over here, which is where your fight, flight, freeze circuitry, your amygdala, a lot of people know that organ, where that rests. And so you're going to have this sort of push-pull dynamic between the limbic and the frontal. And when we run some screens on some of these executives, you'd be surprised how much they're impaired and neurocognitively.
Wow.
And yet getting, great checks or bonuses, or their spouse thinks they're the best thing under the sun, which is great, but they're suffering and they're they're not performing to their max. So we kind of unlock that with some really innovative neurotech. We'll also do some deeper dive assessments on this realm of the irrational, which I think neuroeconomics and behavioral economics have done some great things with, whether it's Dan Ariely's work or Blink, Gladwell and all those guys. They all have written some wonderful work around why we do things that don't make sense. And so we start with there on the tail end of the bell curve. We go out there and search for those things. I don't do the DISC and the, and all the Myers-Briggs and all these basic assessment tools. Why? Because in my opinion, my population I work with aren't going to be helped by that. They know how to take tests. They know how to score high in an EQ test. They are actually decent functional people who have been so much in a trauma state that they're using words of wellness, words of transactional goodness and execution at the cost of truth. So that's a very difficult bandwidth to go find the problem in, because their strength is their weakness. That's the actual problem.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I'm sitting here trying to process it all. It's not often that I'm like, oh, my strength is my weakness. I get it. Take me through what, and I know this will be different, by the way, for each executive, for each person, each client. I know everybody's going to be different, and especially in their process. And as you peel away the onion, or the 18th level, I believe you said, whatever level we're at, I might be on the 30th. I don't know, whatever level we're at in terms of getting to that trauma. But take us through what like a normal, I don't know if we'd say intake or onboarding, and I'm not going to say user experience, not an app, but take us through a normal, like what it looks like to begin the process. Let's say that.
Yeah. Well, typically, again, since I work in, 5 continents right now, I mean, I'm all over the place. I'm obviously travel's a little different with the COVID stuff, but I certainly have still been a warrior getting to people as much as I can.
Amazing.
And them to me. So yeah, because it's just not going to slow me down. But the typical process is I try to do both in person, face to face, and virtual as much as I can. Why? Because even though we're doing a Zoom call, there's some really interesting research that's been done on brains in the last year. I think it's out of Stanford. Don't quote me on that, but it was one of the California brain schools that are really respectful. But basically what they found out was if you stay on Zoom too much in interpersonal contexts that are not matching, in other words, this is a very intimate way to be speaking with someone. And I don't think our brains were designed from an evolutionary standpoint to do this type of intimacy the whole time with people who you don't even know. And yet half corporate America, well, all of us have been stuck doing that. And it can really confuse the social intelligence systems of the brain, in my opinion. And so I say all this as a context to say, I will not give up the in-person piece, because there's something about the human face-to-face touch component, old school, that you need in getting people to trust, have rapport, and get safe. And so the typical onboarding process will always include an intensive on the front side. I usually try to do the handshake, the eye contact in real time, 3D, do some neurotech work, but definitely get some assessments done that aren't done online that you need to do better, in person, and get at least the wheels turning on safety making in the brain. Engagement that way. And then, certainly we'll move towards the virtual. I'll send some lab kits to them so they can give me some, urine and saliva samples for the neurochemistry stuff. And we'll get on a phone call if they're in a conflict or a pickle and they want to process something. Certainly there's a time and place for it, but it's used very sparingly. And I'll be honest with my audience here. I'll use a phone call without Zoom more than Zoom. There's something about my psychological resonance with another human being, and I think them with me, when there isn't this sign of being watched, this performance while you're trying to find your heart at the same time. And when you can take that away, when people can be walking in their backyard in their shorts and, just whatever they have, a beer in their hand, if at the time, I don't know, they can get real. They can start talking wherever they are. And I just think there's a compromising that happens in the Zoom world. And I think it's not everything that it's cracked up to be. And so I think for me, I've had to keep the psychological integrity to how I deliver my work. So we don't end up having a one step forward and 2 back kind of program.
No, that's really helpful. And you confirmed some things that I always just was curious about, and the idea of how we perceive people and how we interact over Zoom over time, and whether that's
Yeah.
like whether it's right, whether it's wrong. And I noticed the difference. So we didn't even do even
Yeah.
just in my day-to-day. So we didn't do video for years. I never wanted to. We always did like kind of radio style, if you
Yeah.
will, interviews and things like that. And I was like, I
Right.
don't want to do video. I don't want to. It's like different. I know it's gonna change some things in me, and I did notice a change, and I'm like, am I making this up? Is this like something different, or is this really change some things? And you
Yeah.
confirmed it. I was like, I thought I was making it up, so
I don't know.
thank
There's
you for that.
something there. I
All
mean,
this free therapy I'm getting, thanks
ah,
doc.
well, we've seen a lot more of Zoom. I've gotten a few just in the last 6 months, and obviously more in the past year, but of Zoom related, anxiety, Zoom related panic, Zoom related disconnection. Yeah, I think we won't see probably the long-term effects of this till, more time down the road. But, the wisdom piece has to kick in. Just because something's available and seemingly convenient may not mean it's the best thing. And that's a very big nugget to remember, that there is this holdback and inhibition that we still must have. And this is links actually over to the executive psyche. There still has to be this inhibition that a good part of us that says no and has boundaries, even though we can have something. And that can be a pleasure, it can be a thing, and anything in between. And I think that's the very hard thing to convince somebody who has had 99% of things that they've just gone after and gotten, to then tell them, oh, yeah, stop that methodology. It's not working for you. When they look and you go, what do you mean? It's been working fine. Look at all the stuff I have. Look at the nice thing. Look at what I achieved. And I go, yeah, but you could be at that tipping point now. No tipping point comes with a big sign that says, hi, I'm your tipping point. Change your methodology. It doesn't happen that way.
It would be helpful if it did come with a sign.
It'd be nice.
Maybe next time.
Right.
So what is like and again, I know this will vary too, but just for context, like what does a length of engagement look like? And by the way, that's a two-part. So meaning obviously there's a corporate side of the business, and then there's the one-on-one. So maybe kind of clarify both, how that type of length of engagement looks.
Yeah, I really try. Obviously, at the end of the day, the program success is really about solving something. I mean, and for some people, it can be a weekend retreat, an intensive that's 3-5 days. A lot of times, if you guys check out my website and look at the testimonials page, I'm rather proud of it, because a lot of those people that have shared stories in a very unsolicited way, they just write their stories to me over and over again. Wow. Have told me most of their change happens in one of our 3 to 5 day retreats. And I just have that style. I'm not saying that I walk on water. I'm just saying that I've gone through so much of the psychological abuse of my own field and know that if you can just speak truth quickly, you can really stop a lot of unnecessary suffering. And so I really start with the ending and the beginning and really peel that off real quick and hard on the front end, because I find most people are resilient enough and they've been aching to hear it. And especially in this world now that we live in, where there's just so much subterfuge in language, it gets very, very, very tricky. And we're aching for somebody to just look in our eyes and say, this is the way it is. So, most of my engagement, I would say maybe 50 to 60% of them, a little over half, are going to be just your private retreat model. We fly to them, I fly to them, or they to me, wherever they need me to plug in. And we'll solve a particular symptom or issue that can be done that way. Now, obviously, systemic programs like culture change, team conflict, little more deeper dive ones are going to be more 3 to 6 month kind of consulting endeavors, and some of them longer than that. And then I'll have the executive that has an addiction. There ain't nothing going to be fixed in 3-5 days with that. I can at least get the brain not on fire so it can self-regulate better and actually process information more rationally, to then do a program of change on around, pleasure seeking, whatever their demon is, so to speak. And those programs could be anywhere from 6 months to 12, because a lot of times we have to play cleanup in a lot of areas, not only in the C-suite, but in their marriage, at home, in their health and wellness. Some of them have comorbid issues going on with their body that we've got to make sure we're getting right too. And so we'll pull in a whole team of subcontractors, of experts that I'll use when there's a certain medical or clinical issue outside our wheelhouse. That sometimes happens.
Yeah. And so for Gray Matters International, for your program, for what you're doing, I mean, so what's next? Like, what's next? What's on the calendar? I mean, what are the goals going forward?
Well, there's always, it's a lot of people have been asking me to do. I got a recent call from A&E on a reality show, and I'm sorry, I just can't go that way. That was one of them, things on the docket that my team and I had to talk about.
I'd watch. Come on.
Well, I know a lot of people do, but it's not me. When I think of my future, when I think of where I'm going, I like being this under the radar, undercover guy, helping people without having to be, seen as, hey, here's this guy helping us with some executive addiction. No, I don't, no one wants to talk about it. And I don't want that. I don't want to have to be that. I want to be able to just get a brain to shift and change. And so a lot of times people will come to me and say, well, what's the next thing for you? You got to scale. You got to scale. And so that's kind of one of the things we're looking at. Is I was approached in the Middle East by somebody who wanted to start a Gray Matters center, because none of my work's really a brick and mortar thing. I've been just living on Boeing 737s forever. And so there's this idea for me of how to consolidate the intellectual property, the technologies, the work we're using, and literally make it an actual transformational center. So we're kicking around some ideas in the Middle East. And it was some folks over there, because I do get a lot of executives from Asia, from Middle East, Europe, and so I'm just entertaining that. Who knows? But we'll see. I think the brick and mortar idea of Gray Matters may be something, because I'm getting older. You're not going to want to travel like this all the time. So we'll see.
That's awesome, and I like to see it. I can't wait to see it happen one day. And then I'm like, I remember I was talking to Doc about that one. Look at that center. That's amazing. You're helping a lot of people, and that's your legacy. I mean, that's just my 2 cents, but I'm like,
thank you.
Your legacy going forward in your IP, because it's tricky, because you can't to want to even think about duplicating yourself. But that IP, all those things. I mean, to me, that's important. Like, that's your legacy. That's your work. That's what you've poured your life into so very obviously into helping your clients. I mean, it comes across very clearly in this interview, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this can sense that. That being said, so final question on my end: if you like who's a good fit typically to work with Gray Matters, and if you will, you can obviously address them directly, because sometimes people are watching something and they're thinking about like, this sounds good. It sounds like something for me. And it's not about a sales pitch. It's really just about like helping somebody identify, like, if they're one of those people, because maybe they've been this way so long that they don't know there's an alternative. I found that that's happened with a lot of the high performing people that are in my network and that I'm around. And sometimes they don't even know. They're like, I thought this is just the way I was, and this is the way my life had to be. So maybe could you just speak to that on who's usually a good fit?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I do hear a lot. Wow, I didn't even know someone like you existed. And there is obviously a desire to personalize and customize this type of care for people. But I would say the ideal client, really, in my opinion, because I've actually turned away a lot of business with people that think they're a fit, and I'll tell you why. This is very hard work.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of half truths in the change process. And when I sense that someone hasn't exhausted that, or they're trying to tie my arms behind my back while trying to get change because there's a gun to their head, so to speak, and they're trying to say, hey, yeah, I'm in this, I really want to change, but they're trying to tell me how to do it for them. That's a big red flag. That they want the pain and the dissonance within to reduce, but they don't want to do what's right. What's fully virtuous, ethical, and fully true. And the brain and that really brain and ethics and virtues actually align very well when you get all the cylinders running together. But we have a lot of methodologies in the world that are very content with giving a half-truth type solution. Just getting a little, if you're depressed or anxious or have a problem with a behavior, just get it a little less dysfunctional. I'm not your guy for that. I'm going to go in there and rip everything up. Why? Because the brain, if there's anything toxic left in and around your world, and there's any BS or self-deception in there, it's going to find it and use it as an excuse not to change. So full systems work is a cornerstone of mine. Certainly I'll go in and solve a problem. If you're engaged with me on an XYZ behavioral, sure. But when I start sensing that piece to your change is going to continue because you got your hand over here. And even though I'm not hired for that realm over there, I'm going to call BS on that because that's going to work against you. And I think that's what happens a lot is people will hire me for change, and they'll have their hand in the cookie jar somewhere. They don't want me to see it on something else in their life. And I go, no, they're actually all related. I don't know how to tell you it. They actually all are. You can't be a good person 63% of your life and hire, and then 37 be over here, and you're hiring me for this piece. I'm telling you, they're all connected, and that's what I think some people don't like. And I think that's the client that's not a good fit is when they want to compartmentalize goodness, wisdom, beauty, truth, excellence into their methodology, into their way of manufacturing it. Not a fit for me. This table that this computer's on is a table. I don't care what you think or I think. It's a table. There's a lot of constructs in our world that are as hardcore and inviolatable, if that's the word, as this table. Pardon me. I search for clients who are ready to hear that. Now, I understand people aren't ready, and that's fine. There's a difference between not ready and being willing and not ready and being unwilling. They're two different things. And if you can be not ready, but very humble in your not readiness, sign you on in a heartbeat. Yeah. But the other type, very difficult. Those clients I have to help have the right problems. That's the thing you have to help them do.
Man. Well, Dr. Fleming, I have to say, this has been great, very enlightening. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure my audience did too. If somebody's watching this right now and they want to learn more about Gray Matters International or connect with you and your team, I mean, what's the best way for people to follow up?
Yeah. Again, since we talked a lot today about the travel and such, I think the best way to get a hold of me is always on a good old email, hitting my website, shooting one of the contact forms. They always come to me. People seem amazed that when they ring or send an email that I'm the one answering. I'm the one responding because I just don't want to outsource all that. Again, it starts with that first, personal touch. And so, hit my website, which is Gray Matters INTL, and that's GREYMATTERSINTL.com.
Fantastic. And we'll definitely have that in the show notes for everybody. So you can just go down there and click on it. And we'll make sure that we send you to the right place. And definitely, if you're watching this and this resonated with you, definitely start the conversation. So Doc, I have to say again, pleasure having you on the show. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you learned a lot. If you're a first-time listener or viewer, depending on where you're at, don't forget, hit that subscribe button. We have many more great guests coming up for you that have more mission-based businesses and mission-based entrepreneurs behind those businesses. So excited to bring you that. And Dr. Fleming, again, thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone.